Hi there, it's Mark Carosa, Regional Director of Multi-Funds, and welcome to the First Time Seller Series. This is a 10-lesson series presented by Mazan Partners. And today I'm joined by Casey Corey, founder and president of Mazan Partners, and we're going to dig into lesson number 4, negotiating the deal. Now, before we get started, please share this video with your colleagues. Maybe they're considering selling their practice, and this video is just what they need to hear. Okay, let's get to it. So Casey, as always, I'm really excited to dig into today's topic. But before we do, as I ask in each lesson, please tell us a little bit about Mazan Partners and why you decided to create the First Time Seller Series.
Well, thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. Mazan Partners is a 25-year-old consulting firm. We focus on mergers, acquisitions, and succession planning for the advisory arena. We created this series of lessons really because we believe that an educated seller as well as a buyer it makes for a better transaction. And we also know that sellers sell once generally, and owners can buyers can buy, over and over and over again and get better at it every time. So we feel like the sellers, even though there are more of them than buyers, there are, more buyers than sellers, that sometimes the sellers are at a negotiating disadvantage. So we wanted to help with that.
So today, Casey, we're discussing negotiating tips for sellers. And why is this lesson so important to you?
Well, first, let me say parenthetically that I don't propose to teach a professional advisor how to negotiate. My assumption is that most of them already know how to do that. But with that said, there are issues and techniques pertaining to the negotiating of the sale of your business that I hope they'll find helpful. As I've said in previous lessons, we try to find a win-win scenario. We are looking for a win-win transaction every time we do it. We're advocates for the win-win. Not because we're such nice guys, although clearly we are, but because we know that from almost 25 years of experience, if we don't get a win-win, in other words, if both sides are not equally enthusiastic about the transaction, then the transition of clients and assets will not go well. And so when this happens, not only do the buyers and sellers lose, but the clients lose too. And so we really want that to happen. And that's why I felt kind of strongly about having this particular lesson.
So, Casey, we talk about goals and desires of the buyer and seller. If you could, please tell us more about them and why it's so important that each party understands them.
Well, let's talk about the basics first. We know that sellers want to get a fair price for their book. And probably the best way to do that, as we talked about in lesson number 2, is to get a valuation on your book. Most buyers would like to have a lot of it, if not most of it, up front. Or they want some guarantee that if you're going to do some kind of a partial or an installment sale, that there are going to be some guarantees that that money is going to be there when it's time for the buyer to pay them. We recently had a client here recently that was 3 years into a 7-year payout to a seller. The buyer was 3 years into a payout to a seller, and he got hit by a truck. He died. I mean, he was in a car accident and died. And so had we not had a life insurance policy in place that was attributable to this, the seller might not have been able to get the money, because the people left in his firm were his daughters, who were very young and may or may not be able to keep that business going. But the seller at least got paid. Sellers do care about receiving the money in an advantageous manner. this usually means capital gains tax or a capital gains treatment. We know that the Biden administration has come out and said that they want to raise the capital gains tax to 39.6% for anything over $1 million in a year. So that kind of argues that if you've got a book that's worth more than $1 million or $1.5 million, there's a pretty good chance you might want to spread some of those payments out so you can stay under the $1 million threshold if that tax happens to go up. Sellers don't want to be embarrassed by the buyer. You know, what they really mean is if they see one of those buyers or one of their clients after the sale, they don't want that client to come up to them and say, man, I wish I hadn't sold to that Casey guy. I really don't like him very much. You know, he's not treating me the way you did. And so now they're embarrassed. They think that maybe they did the wrong thing. So this goes to culture. I said in one of the early lessons that culture is king. I mean, that is the main thing that we look at, and I'll talk about that later. But anyway, those are sort of the basics that a seller would look for. A buyer, on the other hand, wants a fair price too. They want to get paid for what they want to get what they paid for, meaning they want a good transition. They want the buyer or the seller to help them with the sale, with transitioning those clients, which usually means they want them to introduce them to those clients in a favorable manner. Some buyers would like the seller to stay on long term. Other buyers would like the seller to exit stage left after they get through the transition. Everyone's a little bit different. And they want and most importantly, they want positive cash flow. They want to know that the cash flow out of the business that they bought is positive or profitable for them. So those are the things that both sides kind of look for, and the negotiation is to determine how closely we can come to those things.
So beyond the basics, if you could tell us about other goals and desires that may be more specific to an individual buyer or seller. I'm sure that each one, is unique in itself.
Yeah, some would like to keep the seller staff. I talked about the buyer a second ago, and a lot of sellers would like to protect their staff. They might say, well, Nancy's been with me for 20 years. She helped me build a firm, or maybe some other advisor did, and they want to take care of those folks. Some would like to protect, like as I said, specific people post-sale. Many times the seller would like to continue working on some level. It's really hard to give up after 40 years of being trusted advisor. It's pretty tough to give up that title and become former trusted advisor with one stroke of the pen. So those are things that they look for. Many sellers want to leave a legacy. They want the buyer to hold on to their name, maybe. They've spent all these years, making that name stand for something, or the name of the firm stand for something. And they want to make sure that continues. And a lot of times that means bringing in a successor into your firm rather than selling to a third party, because the successor is more likely to hold on to that name if once they take over.
So then after the goals and desires have been addressed, what's the next step, Casey?
Well, I think the first thing you want to do is think about your objectives. Really, even before you go into this, you want to think about what your objectives are. We'll address emotions, I think, in another question, but for now, let's talk about defining your goals. You've heard that going on a road trip, you've got to have, it's best to have the route, to your destination planned. Selling a business might be the final destination, but how you get there are the objectives. Those are the things like, can I get a price commensurate with the valuation of my firm? What is the least I'll take? I'd like most of the money to be treated as capital gains. I must I want to sell to someone that I'm going to be proud to introduce to my clients. I want to protect some of my staff. I want to keep working, past the time of the transition. I'd like most, if not all, the money up front. And it really depends on what your needs are at that time. And obviously you want guarantees if there's going to be some sort of a long-term sale, either, partial sale over a period of time or an installment sale. You want to make sure they've got the money. So all of those things, you want to put those down in writing so that you kind of have in your head exactly what you're going to use as a benchmark by which to compare the merits of the deal to that, so that you know what you were trying to accomplish. The more you can negotiate with objectives, the more you can avoid or compartmentalize your emotions, which will be there, I promise you. But the more you can do that, and then of course, after you write the objectives down, you got to go back through those objectives and decide which ones of these are really deal killers and which ones am I possibly more flexible on.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned emotions and compartmentalizing your emotions. How does that come into play?
Well, it comes into play every time that we, at least from our experience, there is emotion no matter, even after the sale. There's a lot of seller's remorse that comes into play. But emotions during the negotiation time period is probably the chief way to derail negotiations. Once people get upset with each other, rational thinking is usually kind of the first casualty
Oh,
to
sure.
a win-win negotiation. I act quite often as like a marriage counselor between buyer and seller, trying to get them both to eliminate the emotions and think about how does this deal affect their objectives on both sides. If you go into the negotiation assuming that the other person is out to take advantage of you, then I think you have already lost the ability to look at it at the merits of the deal clearly. To get the best deal possible, you really want to ignore the other person's negative motivations, which you may perceive,
Mm-hmm.
and look at the deal through the lens of what does it do for me? Does it accomplish my goals? Well, I don't care about what that other person is doing. What about me? How does this affect me? We talked a lot in lesson 3 about finding a good buyer. One of the benchmarks of a good buyer is their willingness to listen to your needs and to respond to them. Um, you want to know, does that person acknowledge those needs? I feel like they're responding to them? But the most important thing is you can deal with their emotions. You can be aware of theirs. But the most important thing, I think, is to try to keep yours out of the negotiation, because that'll
Oh,
just cloud your judgment.
gotcha,
Um,
gotcha.
do
So
you, do you
now,
have,
mm,
here's an example. Do you have friends that are advisors? Do you respect how they run their practice? Are you confident that they would negotiate with you in good faith bargaining? And I'm going to guess that if I ask that of most people that about one of their friends that's an advisor, I get 3 yeses to those 3 questions. But then ask yourself, do if that's the case, could I could I do cut corners on due diligence? Since he's my friend or she's my friend, could I cut some corners on due diligence? And the answer is no. And if you don't believe me,
mm,
answer this. Do you, um, you know, if you know somebody and you've known them for a long time, and the two of you over years have talked about your practice, are you always completely transparent about all your issues, good or bad? I mean, do you tell them everything? Or is it that you maybe once in a while color things, in the way that you describe your practice, and maybe, just a little bit of, protecting your own ego to some degree. And I promise you, so are they. They're doing the same thing. So when we get two people that know each other negotiating, we really have to lay down the objectives on both sides and see if we can't eliminate that what they feel like they have shorthand between them. We want to eliminate that.
Hmm. So, okay, Casey, now in the time remaining, could you talk about a few of the rules of the negotiation that'll help it go more smoothly for the seller? I'm sure that there are some specifics that really will help smooth this over.
Yeah, sure. I think first, do not expect a buyer to give you much information about what he or she is willing to do on price and terms before both sides have done their due diligence. You know,
Okay.
you go and you meet for the first time, you share coffee, you start writing things down on a coffee napkin or a cocktail napkin or whatever, and believe me, if you're the seller, quite often, that's what you remember at the end of the negotiation. That's what he or she said when we started this. And what happens is you get disappointed because once the due diligence takes place, everything changes. You must go in, I believe, and not really discuss those things until you get to due diligence. You can talk about your firm's
Hmm.
culture, you can talk about how you do things, but the terms of the deal, wait till after the due diligence on both sides have been done. Otherwise, somebody's going to be disappointed. Once you have a non-disclosure in place, and I wouldn't do one of these without one, I don't care if it's your best friend, you should feel that the person, if you feel the person looks like they might be a good buyer, then
Hmm.
be as transparent as you can with the data that they request. Um, Sellers or buyers, like anybody else, if they don't have all the data, then that produces, you know, risk for them. They consider
Hmm.
something they don't know about as risk. What's the Warren Buffett thing? Um, uh, uh, Risk means you don't know what you're doing. I think that's butchering his quote, but I believe that's what he said. Risk comes from not knowing what you're doing. And so the idea here is if you don't produce or give to them all the data that they need to make a decision, and sometimes it seems like it's an endless request, by the way, then there will be risk. And how do they handle risk? Well, they're going to lower the price. They have to because there are things they don't know, so they got to protect themselves. So if you want a higher price, then eliminate that risk by giving them the data that you're doing.
Hmm.
And the same thing goes for them. You know, make sure they are giving you the data that you want about their finances, the way they handle clients, all those kinds of things. Um, be willing uh, be willing to walk away. I think that's
Hmm.
really a big one. Even if you love the guy or gal that you're talking to, you think they're great people, if the deal doesn't feel right, if you're not excited about the deal, the terms of the deal, be willing to walk away. No matter how far or how much time you spend on it, it's better than going into a bad deal. There's an old adage that says, you know, you can't mess up a good deal and you can't make a bad deal good. And it's very true in mergers and acquisitions. Um, Place the biggest emphasis on gathering evidence of this person's ability to take care of your clients. In other words, emphasis or focus should be on, can this person take care of my clients? And the information that you gather in that regard should also tell you if this person is someone that is going to give you, you know, reasonable terms on the deal too. Because the same kind
Hmm.
of person that would be somebody you would feel good about with your clients is generally somebody that's going to be open to negotiation and taking care of people. I would say get a CPA to look at the numbers. I don't care if you're God's gift to managing money or financial planning. It is advised that you get someone like a CPA or an accountant to take a look at your numbers. Um, Obviously, attorneys look at the documents to find out if you're getting if it's written in a way that you can get capital gains tax treatment.
Hmm.
So you want that. And then the last thing I'll say is make your duties in the transition should be outlined in both the letter of intent and in either the sale agreement or a consulting agreement. I have seen more deals fall apart than any other thing when people start to argue about what they said they would do in the transition. If someone says, I'm going to introduce the clients to you, and what they really is thinking, I'm just going to write notes to them, that's different than doing a face-to-face interview. And believe me, if the two of you have a different opinion on that, you're going to have trouble down the road. And it could affect the whole deal, and it hurts the clients too. And so my advice on this is to get it in writing. Don't commit to anything you're not planning on doing, and don't, if you make a commitment, follow through with it, because I guarantee you the other person's going to expect you to do so.
Mm-hmm. Well, Casey, again, like our previous lessons, really enjoyed our time today. And I think this has been another insightful lesson. That's always our goal. And I hope we've given financial advisors that are considering selling their practice some powerful insight. And next time, lesson number 5, continuity and succession planning. Now, please send your confidential questions to me, mark.carosa@multi-funds.com, or to Casey at ccorey@mazonpartners.com. And until next time, here's wishing you and your clients health and prosperity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Casey.